So, do you have some questions about the content or the intent of the program? Things to clarify about that. I'll talk some about just how the seminar works, but.
Just a red light. Maybe the batteries are gone. No, the red is on.
For that one?
When I had the red, it was on. Okay. Oh, yeah. All right. Thank you for loosening my grip on what colors mean. My question is, because I started Lundro a few years ago from a slightly different lineage, but it's still Kagyu, and what I've heard when others started at the same time, but they had been given different reading, different transmission, different instruction from a different teacher. I kept hearing from the Tergar group that we'll continue with the one that you started, the one that you received the transmission for and the empowerment for. So I continue with mine, but now I come here and I hear your teachings, and I'm wondering, how does this fit? Other than I hear this and I see it as shining light from a different direction and applying it to what I personally experience in my personal Nundro. Do you have something else that, because I always figure that there's a lot that I don't know that I don't know.
Well, this is one of the things, given the mobility of our culture and the way things shift around. This is it's not an uncommon situation. I have a great deal of confidence that the foundation practices are really quite the same at the core. So, in terms of missing out on the general point, I don't think it's likely that would occur. That would be more a matter of, if I was to do something, it would be me just missing the point, but it wouldn't be a matter of having stayed with or changed practice. When Dora and I were given Wondro practice, it was in Ladakh, and the teacher that we received the practice from was a Drikung Kagyu Lama, but this was 1980, I think, 79, when he gave us this practice. And nothing was in English, and he didn't have any translator that could really pull off a translation. But he did have a booklet from Dujum Rinpoche for the Wondro practice. And he said, well, because I have complete confidence in Dujum Rinpoche, I'm sure this is fine. So I have a hard time kind of saying do one or the other. I think there could be reasons to switch, and in which case they would be very personal ones. There would be feeling like, no, it seems like this is the right time for a certain kind of transition, and then I think that's fine too. But that's something to kind of talk through if that's an impulse, and if it's not an impulse, then I think sticking with what you've got is good.
Thank you.
I can say a little about that, having started my Nundro with the Gelu practice. And the actual Nundros are different, the actual practices. Like Gelugpas have 6, including making 100 11, everything's 111,111 instead of 100,000, still referred to as 100,000. The idea is kind of funny that for 10% of the time you're likely to be distracted. The truth
They're
is...
so optimistic.
I know. They're so optimistic. But it gives you that idea, like, you should do 10% more because your mind's going to be. So, you know, I mean, there's the mandala, there's refuge, there's vajrasattva. Then the prostrations can be somewhat separate from that with a different prayer, which has the Guru Yoga in it, but it's not really called that. It has a different name. And then you can do 111,000 water bowl offerings, and you can do 111,000 little satsas. Satsas are those little clay, they're probably in our bookstore, little clay things. They can, of deities usually. Sometimes the Buddha, you make 111,000 of those. I haven't even begun that one. So, and I'm not done with some of these. But what I wanted to say about your question, Cynthia, is, you know, these are form, right? Forms. So whenever I have questions about the form, I realize it's just a question about the form. And the real meat of it is in the experience. So one of the things, I mean, these are, my experience of the Vajrasattva was in a 3-month retreat with 7 people, with my teacher right there, able to see her every day. Once a week teachings, when you went crazy, because you did. It was designed to make you feel crazy. That's the, I mean, they wouldn't say it that way, but to challenge the self-centeredness to the point where you're like, oh my God, I gotta get out of here. We used to call it running down the hill. I've got to run down the hill and leave. So that was a kind of a cooker, you know, a cauldron. You do all 100,000 in those 90 days, 7 to 9 hours a day of the 100-syllable mantra and the sadhana, the visualization of Vajrasattva, and pretty much nothing else except eat, exercise, and sleep. That would be a very different experience than 100 of these a day when you get home from work. Now, all of it is completely wonderful experience, but you can see what we're kind of struggling with as we make these transitions. You know, I mean, do you all have time or energy or money to take 3 months off every year and do one of these nindros? You can get through the whole 100,000 in the 90 days with a tremendous amount of effort. But, you know, we have to make it work for Westerners, and yet something can get lost in that translation. There was something about being in the cauldron with the fire turned up that did something different. And because now I'm doing a lot of these other nidros, some per day, and it's wonderful progress. I see it, but I touch back on that and go, it's not that, you know, it's not that. So we'll be figuring out, you know, because the land at SCOL will open up after the 3-year retreats are out, so we can be thinking creatively about how do we use that space too, possibly for more concentrated nundro, etc. So those were things I wanted to share.
Just one of the points that you raised about the opportunity to retreat, this in terms of a kind of a long-term structured practice path, I think it's there are certain kinds of things that give us deep nourishment and reinvigorate us over time. And one of them is to take time, whether it's a weekend or a week or a month or a year, to do deeper practice. And I think that's something that I would recommend to people, no matter how busy your life is, to at some point think about, well, if I was to insert this someplace out kind of predictably in the future, but to insert it, what would it actually look like? How would I make that successful? So I think that's one thing that's actually important for giving us an opportunity to go deeper, to go beyond either the things aren't working well enough or the things they're working well enough, so I just don't really quite have the energy, but to go into a container where you really have that chance. That's one thing that will reinvigorate us. The other thing that I think is reinvigorating is to take time to do an extended, to do the seminar with Khenpo Rinpoche, or to do a seminar like that where you have a chance to sit with somebody, to set aside some time, and then to sit with somebody and spend time just meditating with an individual who has a very deep practice. That's also can refill the tank in a way, provide some, it's different. So there's just a couple of thoughts for the kind of the long term. So, Stan.
So you mentioned that the Mahamudra seminar, first year he would give instruction in calm abiding. So presumably in other sessions, the second year, people coming back for the second year would get the Hloktong instructions, and the third year Mahamudra instructions.
Yeah.
So you're going to be thinking about ways of replicating that here so that we can get those in a sort of systematic way?
Yes. Yeah. And if we go back to the annual seminar, that would probably be something that we would do in that context, because I think, particularly as we move towards the more subtle placement of the mind and investigation, it's nice to have a retreat container to kind of warm up. So it's more than just jotting some notes down quickly about what we might do sometime. That's a different question, but that's something we have done in the past. So go, ask it again.
Yeah, sorry. I just kind of wanted to know if that would be in a group context, because I've always been interested in sort of more community-based practices.
So group practice of doing the preliminary practices, the
yeah.
We haven't done it that often, but we have done on at least a couple of occasions. We've done short Londo retreats where we all go and come together, and then whatever practice you happen to be working on at that time, we've actually arranged so that's this room for the prostrations, here's for the mandala, over here Vajrasattva upstairs, or so that those are interesting retreats.
I've always thought that would.
You've
There we go. I've always thought that would be really helpful for me as just a way to sort of create that momentum of motivation, something like somewhere to really sort of iron out what what I'm looking for. Sort of at least like create some kind of like the beginning of continuity.
Yeah. It can be helpful. Some people don't like that. They'd rather just do it off by themselves, yogi style.
You see, but then I don't do it.
This is the challenge in providing not just the one size fits all. I remember Lama Tinley told stories in the early days up on Salt Spring Island in Canada, when the Vancouver BC Center got retreat land. They had some Londo retreats, and they had these lean-tos out in the forest, and it was the summer, and you had all these hippies who'd all joined in to become Buddhists and all raring to go, and so it was really hot. And so there are all these people doing prostrations, and Lama Tinley walked by. Everybody'd stripped down to the BVDs and undies, and this is kind of like, these people are barbarians.
Barbarians.
Yeah. Sleeper.
I don't need the microphone. I just wanted to say that if anybody has a whisper of a thought about going to India, that we're going to be meeting after this.
Actually, the streamers need to know it.
Yeah.
It's for the streaming.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if anybody has a whisper of a thought about going to India, we'll be meeting after this, probably about 15 minutes after we end, in the tent area.
Yeah. And we can just sort of take the India out of the equation, because you might not want to go to India, but you might think maybe if I could compromise and make it to some country where the air wouldn't kill me, like Taiwan, perhaps. So Khenpo Rinpoche has done seminars in Taiwan, and actually last November he did a Yidam seminar in Taiwan.
But this next one's India.
This next one's India, though. So, Margaret.
Bill, could you talk just a little bit more about what the seminar will be like, what it's been in the past, like on a daily schedule?
Mm-hmm.
And second question about the program.
Oh, it died. That was the red light. It was dying. Oh, here.
And also about the program itself. I heard some people say that it's a quarterly, you do one practice,
Mm-hmm.
like Vajrasattva, let's say the 100 syllable.
The quarterly, the schedule of commitment. Yeah. That was the next thing on my list to talk about, was what the seminar itself is like. As unless there's some other more general question, but we can go back to general questions too. But the seminar is it's varied from 7 to 10 days, and the daily program usually starts at 6, and then there's just a session of meditation with Khenpo Rinpoche, and sometimes there will be some kind of teaching, but it will be on the briefer side, not like a lot of content to absorb. And so there'll be starting the morning, just settling the mind in its natural state, and then doing the 3 clearing breaths and recitation of some prayers of refuge, bodhicitta, and then to do calm abiding practice. And very often, sometimes he'll give an instruction for one of the calm abiding practices, so that sometimes that instruction will be given at that time. Then to sit for about an hour, and then breakfast. And depending on where the seminar is, there's more or less encouragement and expectation of silence. Sometimes when it's in a hotel and it's a lot of coming and going for meals, then it's harder to maintain that. Or the hotel's one place and the seminar's another place. So there'll be a breakfast break, and then teachings. Teachings basically 9 to noon, and in that, Khenpo Rinpoche will go through. He'll go through all the different teachings and practices associated with the seminar, and with the Ngondro practices, he will give general instruction, and then in the afternoon, there'll be sessions. There'll be some sessions where different things are done depending on which level you're on and what you're doing. But there'll be a session where the French lamas will teach Ngondro the details of the Ngondro practice to the French-speaking people, and there'll be somebody teaching Spanish-speaking people, and somebody teaching frequently Eric, Dora and I have also done it in the past, teaching Ngondro to the English-speaking people. So those would be more how to actually engage in the form of the practice, because it's necessary to spend some time to actually learn the form. Otherwise, it's a lot of floundering around. You can't really do it. You have to kind of get the form straight, and then you can flow into it. Khenpo Rinpoche will also, apart from the calm abiding practices, the four thoughts that turn the mind, he will offer commentary on the four immeasurables. He'll offer commentary on specific prayers that are part of the recitations, the Doji Chang Tongma, that prayer. Some instruction in Chenrezig practice. And usually, Khenpo Rinpoche has also done some, you could call it adjunct, teaching on an adjunct topic. And when he was here in 1996, he's taught all 7 points of the 7 points of mind training. So that was one thing that he did. 1 year he's taught on a number of other things, some teachings by Gampopa. Usually it's something that has it's a relevant topic, but particularly from the bodhicitta side of the relative bodhicitta side, emphasizing that. Sometimes, not always, sometimes there's Q&A sessions, but they're not as extended. The evening session is always Chenrezig. Sometimes it shifts around. Sometimes it's a late afternoon session, and then dinner is after that, and a request for silence after dinner. But if we're all together in one place, then Chenrezig is often done after dinner. It's shifted around some, depending on the venue. I'm looking at Linda, thinking, hey, you probably remember. You have less confusion about multiple different times you've done it. So you've only done it once, so you only have one thing to remember. What are the observations would you offer about just the daily schedule? Yeah. So it's morning is calm abiding / insight, whatever you're doing, and the evening is always Chenrezig. And usually during the day, in the midst of teachings, if there's some particular point, then there's an instruction, and then stop and do a particular practice. Rest the mind in a particular way. So that's kind of a leaven that flows throughout all the days. Did that cover that part of the question? Yes. And then you had the second question, which was? Is that one working?
Well, I was also wondering, and
the quarterly piece.
The quarterly piece, actually doing the practice when we come home, and how that looks like, just to get an idea of the time commitment involved.
We figured that if a person were to engage in the calm abiding practice and the Ngondro practice and the attendant contemplations, that it's about an hour and a half a day to do that. But if you're doing a scaled back Ngondro practice, it takes less time if you're just beginning the practice and not doing the Ngondro practice. But it does require that you part the waters of your life. It's not. It doesn't just sort of automatically fill in the nominal free space that we think is there in our life. You actually have to make some decisions and let go of some things in order to put this into your life. which is the truth, that's the facts of the matter when it comes to having a kind of a long-term path of practice, is that your life changes. What you spend your time on changes. But if doing the Ngondro practice, since there was sort of an assignment by the quarter to do the prostrations and bodhicitta piece one quarter, and then the Vajrasattva mantra the next quarter, and then the mandala offering, and then the Guru Yoga. We did offer teachings as the year progressed to support that, and we'll continue to do something on, particularly if there's a group of newcomers, and sometimes I've just done it just privately to support people who are doing practice. If there wasn't, we've wound up with a seminar being in November and a June seminar here at SCOL, and then people on one schedule and people on another schedule, and then people on hybrid schedules. So there have been times when it's like we couldn't figure out when to do something that would really help people. So then if it's not too many people, I just say, "Oh, just come on over and we'll go through it." And usually then it's just a matter of, well, what questions do you want answered? So it becomes kind of simpler. So there's support offered if people jump in.
Your section where you talked about Tonglen a little bit kind of got my mind spinning a little bit ago, and I had a lot of thoughts about how Tonglen relates to other various practices and like possible connections, especially sort of like offering practices like mandala offering, soak offering. Could offering practices be considered almost like a Tonglen practices that aren't necessarily called Tonglen practices? Or it seems to me that the same spirit of taking and sending is the taking and sending. The spirit of taking and sending is very similar to the spirit of offering. And I'm kind of curious if Tonglen could actually be considered almost like a less formal way of practicing some of the preliminary practices.
I wouldn't go there. I mean, then I'll confess, I would probably entertain thoughts like that myself. Maybe not that thought particularly, but I wouldn't turn it around and then make some kind of case for it. I would enjoy the momentary synchronicity and let it go.
Yeah, I would say, like your mind, Bill's mind, I like to do those. So I put them under generosity. They're all under, the first 6 paramita of the 6 paramitas, generosity. They're all generosity practices, but don't collapse them more than that. No. Tonglen's Tonglen. It's a specific practice. All the others are specific practices, so we don't mush them. That's going to be one of our challenges as we bring Dharma to the West, is not getting too innovative. But yeah, they're all generosity practice. Give, 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 give. And there's a reason that the teachers say that generosity is the first paramita. It sets the grounds for us to be able to do the rest. They each infuse each other. Generosity infuses ethics, it infuses patience, it infuses concentration. But there's a reason that they're number 1 through 6, with 6 being the wisdom practice. So, yeah, just that's the way I do it. That might be the thread you're kind of seeing.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, okay. But don't go further than that. It'll just get smushy.
Yeah. This is a good example, though. In the moment, we can feel all kinds of little synchronicities will occur to us. Something will just pop up, but the test is how to let it go. Yeah, it's not like, oh, finally there's something new on channel Bodhisattva.
Because I'm bored.
I'm bored with the rest of the programming. So yeah, but those things do come up, and sometimes just in the space that they come up, something just opens. So I don't want to be kind of, squished. Yeah, but there's a skill in allowing it to open without turning it into a pilot for a new series.
The next book you write.
Yeah, that's my next book. So. Margaret.
I have just one more. There's a lot in the news now about the guru, specifically like a tantra or vajra guru relationship and a student or disciple relationship. And I've been thinking about this a lot recently, and so I'm wondering, with the Yidam program, I really don't know that much about tantra or Yidams or anything like that, and I'm just wondering, it sounds like if people are going from this Mahamudra initial program, 6 years, and then going into the Yidam program, are they basically just taking whoever is in charge of the seminar? Are they taking that person as their Vajraguru? Or it seems like it's more of a kind of a personal, individualized, long-term decision versus, well, whoever is leading at the time the Yidam program is who your Tantra master is. Can you just briefly how that works moving into that program?
All right, I'm going to do this in under 2 minutes and 50 seconds. After minimum 6 years, probably more like 8 or 10, then you've had some time to kind of see kind of what your relationship is with the preceptor of the seminar. So it's then, as Bokar Rinpoche said, you may have, he was talking about this, and not apropos of any particular incident, but because people have all kinds of, they read all kinds of things, and then they do all kinds of things, and teachers do all kinds of things. He said, you may have read that in the Vajrayana, you must take your guru as the Buddha. You must see your guru as the Buddha. He said, I want to ask you, just how do you see your guru? He said, do you see your guru as the Buddha? Do you see your guru as the Bodhisattva? Do you see your guru as an esteemed teacher? Or perhaps a wise spiritual friend? Or just a colleague on the path? However you see your guru, start there. Don't make up things. So you have to start, and I would say that after 6 or 8 or 10 years with somebody, you should have a pretty clear idea how you actually are relating to that person. And when we do that, the challenge then, I have reflected on this and thought, I don't think I'm actually qualified to discern whether somebody sitting in front of me is a Buddha or highly realized bodhisattva or semi-realized bodhisattva, I think they would need to have a name tag with a title on there, and then I would just be going, well, the name tag says Buddha, so I suppose so. So, but a part of it is actually we have to look to see how much we actually see in our own insight. Without one of the ways that the root guru is defined is the individual who points out the nature of our mind and it sticks. And that's something that takes it out of you should do this or you shouldn't do that, or it takes it out of that. And then when that arises, when you have an experience of that arises, you know what it is that you appreciate about that teacher. And that's kind of complete in and of itself. And I think some of the things that really go a cropper in guru-student relationship is when people take some kind of generic, or teachers, student or teachers, take some kind of generic sense of that the relationship should look this way, when they're actually talking about a relationship that's extremely unique and individual. It's not something that should generically apply. It's something that should only apply at a very, very unique situation where two individuals are kind of exceptionally close. That's a different situation than let's have a seminar and let's offer this for the benefit of these people who want to come. That's a different situation. That's a very different situation than the situation where, say, Naropa, after decades of study, then is the image of the old woman arises, and he recognizes what it is that's missing, and he has confidence in where he's going to get that one thing that's missing, that element that's missing. And he's willing to dedicate his life to that relationship. This was not Tilopa with kind of a whole bunch of people and world tours of teachings and empowerments. No, this is a completely different thing. And it's easy to romanticize that into like I want, but we kind of live in the world of extreme sports. So, and that approach really should not apply at all in our spiritual life. We should not be spiritual bungee jumpers seeking kind of the most extreme thing. So the notion of the relationship that Tilopa and Naropa had is not, it's not an institutional model for the relationship of student and teacher. It's a very different thing. We should kind of treat it as such. And then go back to Bokar Rinpoche's question, how is it that you see your teacher? And I would add the question, have you known that individual long enough to have some sense of that? It should be some time. We're over, so.
I'll be quick.
Okay.
But I really want to speak to this. I had a totally falling in love relationship with a teacher who probably wasn't a good person to have put that experience with. So when I came to Buddhism, the thing I liked most was that the Buddha was dead. And I didn't have to have that interpersonal relationship. And over the years, and I actually think this has probably been the undercore of my practice, is learning what Trungpa said was don't confuse the teachings with the teacher. And every time I come back to that, it allows me to see the person I'm holding as my teacher from a space of loving kindness and generosity. I don't know if I can say any more on that, but I think that's important.
Yeah. That's very, very similar to the person who points out the nature of your mind and it sticks. You know what it is that you're really valuing. So let's conclude by dedicating the merit. By this may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state.
Thank you.
Thank you
Just
all.
a little beauty in order. So please make the cushions look nice, line them up, pick up all your things because we don't have any janitors. We are the janitors. Thank you.
And I have up here, there's some books up here. If anybody is not familiar with the Wondro practice, you can look at the text here. There's also the blue texts include various recitations that are done to support the daily practice. And there's also these practice journals, which you can look at and see what they're like. Thank you. And we'll have some lunch and